and we have a wonderful guest, I would say. I met her in one of the conference, and she's Emmy, Dr. Emmy, and she is working with American Dental Hygienists Association, and she comes with an amazing, enormous experience of instructional designing, online learning, and been doing really challenging, amazing projects, I would say, in online learning. So welcome, Emmy, to our podcast. Thank you very much for giving us the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being here.
So, I mean, like we're starting with this podcast, and the topic of this podcast is accessibility in online learning. So till now, we were seeing that accessibility whenever there are buildings which are getting constructed. So there are places or there are planning which is happening for people who are specially abled, and accessibility became a thing for them. But now slowly we have seen that accessibility is coming in digital also, in online learning. I was just flipping through, I would say, through Netflix and Amazon Prime, and I found movies which are for accessible folks, people who can't see. And it was a wonderful experience. And recently I met somebody who is into training of kids who are visually impaired or have a disability of hearing. So they have this whole experience dark room where you they can take you, and you can, as a person who is having this blessing of let's say eyesight, you can feel it how those people are living their life and how we need to appreciate them. And my opinion was they are far stronger than us when I went to that, because they have that sixth sense, strong sixth sense. They are really strong folks. What's your opinion on accessibility coming to the online learning? What has been your experience? Because you are at the center of creating these things, the online learning. You're an educator, you work in online learning, you create content. So, yeah, Emmy.
Yeah, and like you said, it's one of those things that, not only is it incredibly important, but it's grown in its importance. And people are recognizing, the need for this and the need for this in different contexts because those individuals have the right to experience the same learning and development that we create on every level. And the fact that we have to put everyone, not necessarily um, in the same box to say, like, hey, they have to be able to complete this, but we just want to give them the same opportunities to complete, their online learning. And I saw a presentation once on accessibility, and a lot of the things I've learned on accessibility have come from others. It's definitely one of those things where people continue to build resources, people continue to learn from each other on best practices for accessibility. And the presentation was called Leave No Learner Behind. And I thought that presenter did a really good job with that title because that's really what it's about. It's about the fact that, when you're building online content and you're building online learning, the whole point is your goal as an instructional designer and someone building, e-learning is that you are responsible for every single one of your learners to be successful. And at the end of the day, their goal and your goal is to meet those learning objectives. And so, leaving no learner behind means that you did everything humanly possible within your course to make it accessible to every single learner that's out there to the best of your ability. So I think that, accessibility really as an instructional designer is part of our responsibility because we want to get those people to, you know, the learning goals and the objectives at the end of it. And that's the whole purpose. And, we talk about accessibility a lot being just, as you mentioned, visual impairments, most people recognize that as, uh, you know, a, a potential limitation for someone, as well as maybe deafness or hearing impairment, those are very common that people are like, okay, that we might have someone who's visually impaired or we might have someone who's hearing impaired. So let's make some accommodations for these individuals. But the truth is, we're also recognizing that these days there are more noted disabilities or more potential limitations that people could have. So people have ADHD, they might have sensory processing disorders. There are things like, neurological disorders, cognitive impairments, physical limitations. They may not be able to use a mouse or a keyboard properly. So psychological issues, memory loss, emotional regulation, there's so many things that can go into this box. So we're not always talking, all of just visual impairments or just hearing impairments. There's a lot of different ways that we can make our courses accessible and reach a broader audience. And again, make sure that as an instructional designer are meeting that goal that says no one, despite their limitations, would be left behind, and they're going to meet those learning objectives at the end of our course.
Yeah, really, that's a really great point you made. It's not just about the hearing or visual. It's about so many things. It can be so many limitations. Uh, I don't call them limitations, like I said, that I find these people very strong, very creative sometimes because they have other senses because they're able to apply their senses in a more channeled way. I've seen that personally because the experience I was talking about. So the dark room, this organization they have created, you get inside it, and somebody who is a visually, let's say, specially abled person. I don't like to call it disabled. Specially abled person with because of the eyesight. He was taking me inside, and then I could see nothing, and then he said that, okay, now you touch and feel and just go about it and recognize everything. And that's what I was saying. It was an amazing, strengthful experience I had. And that's where I said that, okay, hey, you know what? You're far stronger than me. Uh, because you're able to use your senses pretty strong. And it's just great if we as a professional, we can do something for them just to bring them up in the ladder of the growth. And that's what you were saying, right? So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's about just basically, giving everyone the same equal opportunity, despite what their abilities look like or the changes that they just have to make in order to be successful. We want to make sure that we're helping facilitate those changes in order to do everything that we can just to get them to the end of the course the same way anyone else would and to meet those objectives because we want everyone to learn. That's our responsibility as instructional designers is we just want
right,
to get everybody to that finish line, and there are just unique ways that we might have to do that.
right, right, right. Okay, so Emmy, that was great introduction. Now let's get deeper into the technicalities of it. Since you are an expert, you're an instructional designer, so you have been doing it. If you can tell us more about it, how it is being addressed. So, for example, a question I can put on the table right now. So, if you're creating a course, okay, and you need to make it accessible for somebody having hearing situation or visual situation or some psychological situation, how you make sure in one course putting all these elements. So, what are the details or technicalities of it? Yeah, Amy.
So I feel like there's a lot, I just mentioned so many different potential, it, you know, differences that people can have in their learning needs. And it's a lot, right, for somebody to feel like they need to cover. And the truth is, as an instructional designer, you might not have it perfect every time, and you might not have the ability to cover all of your bases, but there are a lot of great resources out there that you can use to kind of uh, what I like to do is kind of give myself a checklist of, kind of potential ways that I can help with certain situations to make my courses more accessible. And then as you learn more things, you're kind of building on that checklist. So I know kind of knowing where to start as an instructional designer can be really overwhelming. And there's already a lot of resources out there that I highly recommend to kind of wrap your head around this topic and to start that checklist to start making these changes. So one good place to start is the web Accessibility Initiative, and they have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so WCAG.
Oh, yes.
And their documents, yes. So a lot of people have already heard of those. They have several documents. They've been around a long time. Of course, it started as web accessibility, but a lot of that translates over to e-learning. And just kind of wrapping your head around what those guidelines look like. And they cover things like text, images, sounds, some best practices for like the coder makeup that define the structure of presentations, um, and things like that. And so kind of having those guidelines as part of your how-to is somewhere to start. And then specifically for learning and development professionals, there is a nonprofit volunteer organization out there, and they're called Learning Content Accessibility Spotlights. So the LCA Spotlight has a lot of wonderful resources specifically for learning and development professionals. And they have some a YouTube channel that has some how-tos in it. I know they do have a LinkedIn group that can be very active and answer questions. So, the first place to start is just pulling those resources to start understanding what accessibility means. How are some ways that you can put these in your courses? Things like just having proper color contrasts. There are free websites out there where you can plug in like a logo or certain images and things to make sure that the color contrast is appropriate for people who might have issues with, like low vision or things like that. So um, those are two really good places to start, from a technical aspect. Do It is another website, Disabilities, Opportunities, Networking Technology. They're very good. And then, I feel like as instructional designers, we kind of feel like everyone talks to us about, make our course engaging, make it engaging, right? That's always been like it's got to be engaging. And you worry like, well, if I'm trying to do all this stuff with accessibility and I have to worry about colors and I have to worry about sounds and I have to worry about sensory overload, you know, oh my gosh, is it going to be engaging or am I going to have to strip everything down and make it more boring? And the truth is like, yes, you might not be able to have all of the bells and whistles because they may not work with a screen reader properly. It's another thing you can do is make sure, you run your course through screen reader and just make sure it works, or make sure that the tab order works properly. So someone who's not using a mouse can just tab through on the keyboard. So, uh, these can be really complicated things the first time you do them, but then after you kind of learn how they work, they get a lot easier to do over time. And then, the more you start doing it, the more you realize that, what, sometimes I do have to take out a few bells and whistles to make sure everything works properly on some of these, software programs like Tab Order or Screen Reader. But, I'm a pretty neurotypical person. I do this for a living. Sometimes I get overwhelmed at certain learning courses because they do have too much. Like, yes, they're engaging, but am I really learning from them at the end of the day? Am I meeting those objectives? And if you were to take out X, Y, and Z, because it's a little, over the top, or it's this, exciting game that's in the course, do you really need it at the end of the day to meet those objectives? And if you took that out in order to make it more accessible, are you still meeting those objectives? So again, your end game as an instructional designer is that I have certain things that I want my students to learn. And so, if you're asking yourself that with every activity, and all of those extra engaging things that you put in there, sometimes a basic cognitive overload kind of works for everyone. You're not just doing it for a certain subset of people, you're doing it for all of your learners. And so at the end of the day, you might find these things are beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, right. And like you said about the gamification, what I've been talking about wherever I go and I talk to professional, I say that, okay, hey, you know what, let's not confuse the learning with game playing, because at the end of the day, you should learn rather just playing, because we
Yes.
should not lose that essence, like you said, in the accessibility also, that we should not lose the context of the whole or the purpose of the whole creation. That, okay, at the end of the day, I, as a person, whosoever I am, should learn. Not just I just played a game, I felt good, and then I went home. Because at the end of the day, we are serving a purpose, right? So yeah, I got that. I understand. That's a great point, I would say, because like you said, that we tend to concentrate more on bells and whistles. Let's make it engaging, let's make it jazzy, it needs to be flashy and everything, but it can be a page turner. But if it is making an impact psychologically and addressing what's in it for me from a learner perspective, if I'm a person with some special situation, then it should help me rather entertain me when it comes to online learning. I think that's what you meant, right?
Correct. Yeah. It's pretty much just kind of some of those things, have a purpose and they do serve a purpose. So it's okay to have them in your courses to do try to engage learners, but it's really just thinking at the end of the day, number one, is it accessible to all of my learners? Because some of them might be left out if there is something about it that's not functional to someone with, lower vision or a hearing impairment, something like that. Or you know, again, do you really need it? It might just be overwhelming. So it's really just kind of, it's not necessarily that you have to take all of it out, but it's, prioritizing the end game, like you said. It's all about our goal at the end of it. And then sometimes it, will help accessibility to realize that we might not need all of those things in it.
Right, right, right. So, okay, I mean, so being a professional who's working here, so we talked about that, okay, what needs to be done, and you mentioned about what are the resources which are available readily right now. And it's really helpful for our viewers and we will flash it on our screen also so that they can just note them down and use it for their own purpose. But what are the challenges? You briefly touched upon the challenges that, okay, when you're creating it, you might not be able to make it accessible for everyone, a single video or a module. But what are the more challenges? Are there any further challenges while making this content for our target audience in this case?
So I think that um, there are basically a lot of, again, it's kind of that sense of being overwhelmed, I think, is the way to start. Because you want to do it, you want to help your learners, you want them to be successful, and yet it really is kind of pulling those resources. And then I know that time and budget constraints can be really hard too. And so, uh, it might take you a long time at first. I know when I was first kind of trying to make some of the courses at my current organization more accessible, really focus first on closed captioning because really a lot of our courses are just, we have a lot of live webinars that we do for our learners. So, they're just big video chunks that we're trying to disseminate when they're over. And we realized, closed captioning was a priority just because it's a long video and people should have the right to be able to, view it with captions to reach a broader audience. And don't have really the budget for a lot of these closed captioning softwares that are out there. Some of them do have free trials, some of them are free, but the video can only be, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, things like that. So you definitely have to kind of do your research at what's out there because there's a lot of options. And then we realized that Adobe Premiere Pro, if you happen to have the Creative Cloud Suite, Adobe Premiere Pro actually transcribes videos and it does a really good job of it. So I highly recommend if you're already, most people do have the Creative Cloud Suite as, part of their repertoire of tools already. So you're not buying a new software on top of that. You're just learning how to use an existing one. I'd never used Premiere Pro before, besides just throwing a video up there and, kind of chopping out a couple things. I'm not a video editor. It's not one of my huge skill sets. I'm very basic in my knowledge of that. So just learning that this tool existed and something that I already used was phenomenal. It transcribes the video all by itself. It does a really good job. I do highly recommend going through to edit, transcript because you want to make sure it's checked for accuracy. And then you're able to download a closed caption file that you can then upload to, Articulate, which is what we use. We Rise and Storyline a lot. So, just it was already in front of me and it was such a low learning curve. So it's things like that um, it took a lot at the time, but now it's just part of my regular, okay, here we go. And so once you kind of, again, I talk a lot about a checklist because it's hard to keep track of everything we have to do. It's hard to keep track of all these things all the time. And so it's just okay, that's one box checked. Now I know how to close caption all of my videos every single time without fail. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. It's not a new program. It didn't cost me any extra. I already had this tool. And
Right.
so things like that will happen if you just kind of put that initial time in, and don't get too overwhelmed. Then you just, you're doing the best that you can. And that's what's important.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. Yeah, Emmy. So right till now we talked about the challenges, current situation, but where you see the world is shaping. Because one of the UNESCO reports said that 87% of specially abled people said that okay, this accessibility is really helping them, and I'm sure it is because. When you can't do anything and then you get something which really enables you. So I want to say it's not 87%, it's more than 100%. It should be more than 100%. Everybody likes that. When I am not able to do anything and suddenly I'm able to do that thing. So so where you see this whole thing going in future, what technology might come, what kind of innovations might come, which will help the world of doing for accessibility as an important subject or a topic, or I would say pillar for this global growth and businesses and families and personal wherever we are. So yeah, what about the future according to you?
I'm excited about the fact that, well, AI is pretty limitless. I mean, there's so much potential there, and you don't know where people are going to go with it. And I think that, right now, when you're building courses and you're kind of having people beta test them, you have to go out of your way to, all right, I'm going to beta test this with a screen reader. Now I'm going to beta test this with just using tab order and, not having my mouse. I'm going to beta test this without sound. Now and I feel like, AI has that potential to kind of be that learner where you can program it to say, hey, what do you see in this course that would, be difficult for someone with low vision? What do you see in this course that might be difficult for someone who can't use a mouse? So I feel like that's eventually coming, or, in my best case scenario, that's what I would love to see. And they'll probably come up with stuff in my wildest dreams I could never imagine. So, I feel like AI is already helping us streamline our processes. And, we can use it to kind of check ourselves even already. Sometimes when I'm writing texts or emails and things, I'll plug it in, to an AI program and have it help me, edit and make sure that it sounds good for the right audience and things like that. So that's a pretty limitless potential that I'm excited about. But on top of that, if you really dig into a lot of the programs you already use, like my example with Adobe Premiere Pro, this is a feature of this program that they just did an update. Probably I've been using it for probably about a year and a half to close captions, and they did an update to it, and it got a lot more accurate. Um, with this last update. So it's like these companies are recognizing that they need to do this, and it's becoming better and better as part of their programs. We also use Rise and Storyline, and Articulate does have specific things just about accessibility. So you can already get into their accessibility resources, and they're constantly building on those things and they're constantly improving them. So, just keeping an eye out on what these companies are doing to try to help you do this better, and the resources that they already have, and it's just continuing to grow. So I think it's important to just recognize that it's out there, and if it doesn't look good right now, go check back in a year because I bet they're going to update it, because people are seeing, like you said, it's one of those things where everyone, like I'm very neurotypical. I really, I do this for a living. I'm looking at a screen all day. But let me tell you, when my infant son is making a whole bunch of noise and my husband's got the TV going in the background, if I'm doing something, I always have closed captioning on, like constantly, and I'm carrying around my phone and I'll pause it for a second and I'll go back and read it because I'm not listening, but I'm trying my best to grasp it. So like you said, these things help pretty much, they have the potential to help anyone. And it's amazing how much you don't realize that, you yourself, no matter what your situation is, will probably end up using it or use a feature of it, and you don't even realize it. So it does help everyone, and it is important.
So that's an amazing example you just said about your infant crying or asking for attention and everything. So this remind me. So for example, if I want to watch something these days, what we do is we just lower the sound and we just read it. We watch the video and we read it. So wow, this is so amazing because you just gave an example where everybody needs this, not just people who got some limitation or a situation, but we all need it. And when you were talking about intelligence, AI, I just thought of a word, accessibility intelligence.
Love it.
So yeah, I just found this new name, new word, and I'll be using it because that's really a strengthful word because and it is connected with we all need it. Like you just gave an example. So yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I'm also hopeful about the AI part. Yes.
Yeah, and speaking of, I actually have to give a lot of credit to a former coworker of mine. So before I worked for my current organization, I worked for the International Association of Firefighters, and it's a it's the union organization that represents over 300,000 firefighters. And one of my coworkers, she did a lot of the online learning that was grant funded. Um, and so she had to make sure that she met a lot of the 508 compliance, because that's what the government requires for any online learning that comes out that's funded by grants. So her online learning had to follow very strict accessibility guidelines. And a lot of times when she would tell people how much effort she had to put into that, they would kind of joke a little bit like, oh, all of your firefighters are, visually impaired. Like everybody kind of stereotypes firefighters as being these strong, able-bodied individuals, right? Which is pretty accurate, not gonna lie. I mean, obviously they do incredible things and they have a tough job. But she would say that, yeah, for a while, like it kind of bothered her. Like it seemed so silly that she was putting so much time and effort into this when you're right. Like most of her audience was these strong, able bodied individuals. But she said, the more and more I thought about it, and the more and more I actually heard stories from some of the people taking my classes, I realized that, they're doing training because they went to an incident and they broke their hands. So now they're sitting in front of a computer trying to, complete this training and they can't use the mouse properly. Or they're trying to do it in a busy station, but somebody walked off with the only pair of headphones, and so she realized very quickly. And so I give a lot of credit to her because she planted this bug in my head that was, you don't you don't know people's situations, and you have no idea if, most of the time they take this training perfectly normal, but today the headphones were missing. So they had to do the entire thing without sound. And, like the example I gave with my son in the background, like it does happen to everybody every day. It just might be a different person every day. And you never know what their situation is going to be, whether they're able-bodied or, or have something special that they need in order to be successful. So I always found that story really impactful. And I always put that in the back of my brain every single time I'm building this stuff, because you just really never know who you're impacting and how important it can be.
No, these are a great example because I'm just thinking that okay, where I have done certain things, and I can say that okay, these things are so helpful to me, were helpful to me because when I want to watch, let's say let's say some podcast on YouTube at night, and I can't just increase the volume of my TV. I just lower the volume. I read the those captions, subtitles, everything, and I just enjoy that. And so yeah, that's a fair point. And thanks to your coworker, because she's really, I would say she's a rock star, because she saw what we are not able to see generally. And you rightly said, now that bug from your mind is transferred to my mind, and that okay, yeah, this is this is the thing. This is the thing. So yeah, great. Thank you very much for this, by the way, for transferring that to me because that's an amazing thought. So yeah. So now, yeah, we talked about what is happening. We talked about uh, what are different limitations, challenges. We talked about future, but we are all running businesses. We are all working for businesses. Then businesses says that, okay, hey, you know what? Can you show me some ROI? Can you show me some tracking? Can you capture some data and present it to me? That okay, yeah, you spend these many dollars in these creating these things. I appreciate that, but I want to see some data. So how that gonna change, or how that will impact, or how that will happen? Uh, so, for example, let me take an example of a sales guy, right? A sales guy, you can actually connect it with the selling, how many sales she has done. You can just map up with the training she has done, and you say that, okay, hey, training got its impact. So how this impact can be calculated or will be calculated according to you going forward?
Yeah, and that's such a tough question because you're right. Everybody always wants everything to be measurable. And even as instructional designers, we're like, we need to have measurable learning objectives and we need to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of this course, right? And it's like you hate to throw out there that not everything is measurable, like you're making an impact on your learners. And again, it might not impact every learner might not even realize that they did it. Because again, you might throw on closed captions for like a half hour of a 2-hour course because you were busy, but you kind of forget that it happens. And then when you get to the end of the course, pass the assessment because you're like, oh yeah, I totally took everything from it. But you weren't automatically saying I would have lost a whole half hour of learning had I not turned on those closed captions. And is that reflected in my final assessment? So it's really hard to do that. And I feel like, as instructional designers, when you're addressing your stakeholders, you really do need to kind of bite the bullet and say not everything is measurable. I know it's always hard to say that, but it can be true that, you're doing something that there's so much out there that says how important it is. There's so much feedback that says how important it is. I think that one thing that you can do is when you do kind of a post, your post course evaluation. By the way, if you're not evaluating your learners after the course, you really should be not just the assessment part, but just the feedback part on, what they felt about the course, things like, that type of stuff to get the feedback about the actual, course itself and the building parts, the interactivity, things like that. So really should be asking things like, you don't want to say like, do you have a disability? Not something like that. But it's more like you want to say like, hey, how can we make this learning more accessible to you? Or, like if you use the closed captions in this course, is there any other accessibility that you would like to see that would help you be successful? If you kind of start planting that bug in some of your course builds, you might get feedback that says, I didn't see this, or I didn't see this, or I didn't see this. And then when you're building your next course, now you do have a little data that says, hey, like a whole bunch of people said that, yes, they turned the closed captions on. I need to continue to do this. But a lot of learners said that they also needed to see, you know, this feature. Um, and now you can start incorporating that. So I do recommend just kind of throwing out, what accessibility features would you like to see in that kind of post-course evaluation, and trying to get some feedback in that way because you're not outright asking people if they have some kind of issue that they need addressed. Instead, you're doing it as a whole audience, like what can make you more successful. Um, so that kind of can help you to help give you a little bit of data. Again, not everything is going to be measurable. So, the firefighter example that I said, the guy who happened to be trying to take the course because he, has a broken wrist. He's probably not going to tell you that the only reason that he passed his assessment was because he had to, use the tab order. Um, there's not always a good way to gauge all of that. So again, it's about, talking your learners at a whole, your goal for this course, just make it part of your build process. Um, because you're not always going to have that data at the end of it that says so many people passed this course because I made it accessible. But you can just try to get as much feedback as possible about what people felt about the course, what accessibility features that they, enjoyed and things like that. So it's a tough cookie. It really is. but there's only really so much that you can do, and you just kind of have to do the best you can to advocate for your needs. I know as instructional designers, we do that a lot. We're like, hey, I need a new video editing software, or I need this, and you put a bunch of notes together and your justification for why you need this and why you're going to pay for it. We do that a lot. We don't always realize it. So accessibility is the same thing. You're going to put some time and energy into this, and you just have to show all the importance of it. That might not always be a certain exact percentage of learning success, but rather kind of your overall goals as an instructional designer to reach your audience.
Right, and after listening to you, what one thing I can understand or say that one thing we can talk about that, okay, hey, you know what, we are inching towards that inclusion of everybody at the same level, and that cannot be measured. It can be felt, it can be seen, it can be celebrated. So, for example, that worker fireman who had a broken wrist. Uh, let's imagine a situation. He was sitting on the side and was feeling bad about it, and suddenly he's part of that group who is doing those trainings, and he's feeling good and he's feeling included in that group. So that can be one way to look at it. And Because when you're doing such a great job for a great cause, inclusion is first thing which comes to my mind. You're bringing to the world or to any workplace, so nobody's feeling left behind. So that can be one where we can try to convince our stakeholders that, okay, hey, you know what, let's not look at the Excel sheet for a minute, and let's look at the some bigger picture. So yeah, that's what I understand from your words. So on that good celebrated note, we came to the end of it. I was enjoying it, and it was becoming interesting, but I know the time constraint. And also, people are not watching the long podcast. They're watching the attention span is another area. They're saying that, okay, hey, you know what? I just watched 15 minutes thing. So we are keeping it that short, Emmy. Thank you very much for your time. We'll meet again. We'll invite you again for some other topic where we quickly touch upon the high and low points of that specific topic. Any closing remark you want to put on the table in this podcast?
Um, I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me. I guess just tying it back to what I said in the beginning, and that presenter that called it, leave no learner behind. I feel like that's important. I also feel like, I stole several resources from other people and several good thoughts from other people. And that's, what we do. We continue to kind of build on our own knowledge by learning from others. And so feel free to steal this and say you learned it from me and you learned it from you, and that's how we continue to grow. So
Great,
best of luck on improving your courses, and thank you so much for listening.
great. Thank you very much, and have a good, I should say, Friday, uh, than the weekend. So thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you for having me.